I'm Kathy with a C.
And I'm Kathy with a K.
And this is Killer Destinations.
In an instant, one young family's life was thrown into the worst scenario imaginable, and nothing would ever be the same again.
Today's destination is Davie, Florida. The history of Davie dates back to the early 1900s when its first settlers arrived and named the town Zona in recognition of their former home in the Panama Canal Zone. The community was renamed Davie in 1916 in recognition of Robert Parcell Davie's assistance in draining the Everglades swamplands to create the town that was carved out of it. By the 1920s, Davie had grown into an agricultural hub known for citrus and cattle. Today, Davie is often called a cowboy town and has a unique Western-themed downtown area due to the town's history. Now home to more than 110,000 residents, Davie's rural atmosphere, strong sense of community, and low crime rate make it an ideal place for families to build their lives. But in 1988, one family's suburban dream was shattered when an unlocked door provided entry for a monster.
A 911 call came into the Davie Police Department late on a Friday night in November 1988. A woman was heard gasping for breath as she said, "Please, please, I need the police. I've been stabbed to death." The dispatcher could hear the woman's labored breathing as she struggled to speak. Then the woman said, with what sounded like great difficulty, "My husband, my baby." And then all the dispatcher heard was silence. When police arrived, they rushed into the house and started clearing rooms in case the perpetrators were still there. And as police walked into the home office, they found 37-year-old Donna Decker dead on the floor. The phone was lying next to her. But as they walked into the master bedroom, they found an even more shocking scene. Two men and a little boy were lying on the floor. The men's hands were tied behind their backs, and all three were bleeding from gunshot wounds to their heads. They were identified as Donna's husband, 37-year-old Bob, Bob's 76-year-old father, Clyde, and Donna and Bob's 2.5-year-old son, Carl. As officers waited for the coroner to arrive, police began an intensive search of the wooded area surrounding the house, and that included a Broward County Sheriff's helicopter and a canine unit. Then, as police continued working the crime scene at the Deckers, a second 911 call came into the Davie police from a payphone. This was about 30 minutes after Donna made her call, and it was an unidentified man who reported a domestic disturbance at the Deckers' address. Now police had to find out who that man was.
A team of 10 detectives immediately started investigating the murders and speaking with neighbors and friends to get an idea about possible motives and probable suspects. But neighbors and friends couldn't believe that Bob or Donna were involved in any kind of domestic disturbance, especially one that resulted in murder. Everyone they spoke with said the Deckers seemed to have a very close relationship, and neither of them seemed to be the type to get angry quickly. Bob and Donna had been married for 12 years, and little Carl was their only child. Bob worked as a general contractor and owned his own firm, and Donna was a hairstylist who worked at JCPenney. They were described as a loving family from up north, which cracks me up, and friends used to tease Donna about her native Boston accent. The Deckers had moved to Davie 2 years prior when Bob built a spacious stucco home in the secluded neighborhood that was comprised of one-acre estates and horse farms. Bob's father, Clyde, had only moved in with them 1 month prior, having come from New York just a few weeks after his wife died. Once in Florida, Grandpa Clyde began assisting Bob with his construction business. The day after the murder, police would only say that they had no suspects, but they did have a few leads. Detectives believed that whatever happened at the Decker house that Friday was between one of the victims and the assailant, but they would not identify which victim. Investigators also had no idea how many people participated in this gruesome attack.
Kath, it was also revealed at this time that Bob Decker, Grandpa Clyde, and little Carl had all survived the gunshot wounds to their heads and were in the hospital in critical condition.
What are the chances?
No kidding. And you know what's also strange is that one of the Decker's neighbors told a reporter for the Miami Herald that when Bob Decker was loaded into the ambulance, he was in handcuffs, which is now making neighbors wonder if there'd actually been an intruder. Donna's funeral was held 1 week after she was killed, but neither her husband, her son, nor her father-in-law were among the mourners. They were all still in the hospital and deemed not stable enough to attend. So, 2 weeks after Donna was murdered, in an article in the Miami Herald, journalist Sally Hughes reported that police now knew that there was only one masked gunman who was responsible for the home invasion of the Decker house. Investigators also knew that Bob, Grandpa Clyde, and little Carl had been shot to silence them, and the reason Donna was stabbed to death was because she came home unexpectedly and went for a knife. Kathy, police knew this because it turned out one person was able to escape from the house before the violence started. As we said, a second 911 call had been made about 30 minutes after Donna called. It turned out that the unidentified man was a friend of the Decker family, a contractor named Charles Panoyan, and he had been inside the home when the killer entered. Panoyan told police that the assailant inexplicably released him before the attack began, and when he got in his car, he drove to a supermarket to use a payphone to make the call. He also told police that unfortunately he could not identify the killer because the man was wearing a cowboy hat covering his hair and a mask that covered his face. At this time, so this is 2 weeks later, Bob, Grandpa Clyde, and little Carl were still in the hospital and listed in stable condition, but their exact injuries had not yet been released to the public. And Kath, in addition, police were still actually concerned about their safety, so they had never released which hospital they were staying in.
Almost a year after the terrible murder of Donna Decker, the case remained unsolved. In an October 1989 interview in the Miami Herald with journalist Sally Hughes, Bob spoke publicly about his ordeal for the first time, and he did so for one reason only, because his wife's murderer was still on the loose. And this interview was on the same day that Grandpa Clyde and Bob and little Carl were moving out of their house in Davie where his wife was killed. Bob sold the house and he was moving his family 100 miles north to Port St. Lucie. Bob told the journalist that the robbery began at about 8:50 p.m. that Friday night. He said he and his dad were in front of the TV watching the 80s show Dallas, which cracked me up.
I know.
There was such a hot show back then.
And I didn't know men watched it.
Yeah, exactly. And then the robber came through the garage door wearing jeans, clean work shoes, a button-down shirt, a mask, and a cowboy hat. And Kath, when they say clean work shoes, what does that mean?
They were work shoes and they weren't dirty.
Was he wearing a uniform of some type?
I'm guessing they were probably boots.
Anyways, he carried a rusty .22 caliber revolver and ordered the Deckers to the floor. Only Bob, his father, and his little boy were in the house at the time because Donna was still at work. And Kath, one thing that caught me is that he described the .22 as rusty. You know, that's a very specific thing. And I know that when people are in a situation with a gun, like when you're being held up, it doesn't matter if you're not a gun person, you're hyper focused on that gun and you notice all these details.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So I was
hoping
kind of
a bullet doesn't come out of it.
Totally. You remember when I told you my sister was held up at gunpoint?
Yes. So scary.
I know, but she remembered everything about the gun.
Yeah.
And we didn't
she's
know
not
guns.
a gun person.
Yeah. Well, now she is,
Now
but
she
back
is,
then
yeah.
she wasn't.
But that's just because now we live in California.
Exactly.
Shh, don't tell Gavin.
He'll come take it. Anyway, so Donna wasn't there. She was at work. And so what happened is that the robber came in and handcuffed Bob and Grandpa Clyde. And he somehow knew the family had a safe in the house because as soon as the men were handcuffed, he told Bob, "Take me to your floor safe."
So he didn't just know there was a safe. He actually knew where it was.
Correct.
Or at least where to look.
Totally. And so Bob was telling the guy, like, there's nothing here, yada, yada, yada. But the guy's like, open it. So Bob opens it and he finds nothing in there but small change.
And it didn't say what small change was. Like, for me, small change might be like
75 cents.
I was going to say $5,000. No, I'm kidding.
Wow.
But yeah, no,
Can I borrow some small change?
I'm thinking like just a few shekels.
Yeah, exactly. I know. That's what I'm picturing too. But anyway, so the robber then orders Bob and his dad and his little boy to go into the master bedroom, and he rips the phone out of the wall. The gunman then hogtied Bob, pulling the rope tightly against his neck, and his poor little boy stayed next to his father on the floor, terrified. This was when the robber ransacked the house and Donna came home from work. And then Bob told the journalist he does not know exactly what happened next. Bob told the journalist that he believed that his wife grabbed a butcher knife from the kitchen, but then the robber grabbed it and used it against her. She then crawled to their office and locked herself in. That's when she dialed 911 and begged for help. Now, while this was happening, the robber went back to the bedroom and shot Bob twice in the back of the head. He then shot Grandpa Clyde in the cheek and little Carl behind the right ear.
And Kath, Bob Decker also gave an update in this interview on his and his son's recovery. Bob said that he had not been able to return to work because the resulting effect on his system meant that he had lost his coordination in his right hand and foot. And he had actually just learned 2 days before this interview that his little son had 100% hearing loss in his right ear. And Kath, the bullet fired into the little boy's head remained lodged in his brain because surgeons actually believed it would do more damage than good to remove it. But otherwise, Bob reported that a therapist had told him that his active little boy seemed to be fine. On Friday, May 4th, 1990, this is exactly a year and a half after Donna Decker was killed, police announced the arrest of 2 men suspected of committing the crime. One was a longtime family friend of the Deckers, and the other was a man who Kath had once been convicted of beating a 4-year-old boy to death. They were charged with the murder of Donna and the attempted murder of the other 3 members of her family. And so, Kath, here's what happened. After being able to piece together this puzzle of circumstantial evidence, detectives charged 49-year-old Charles Panoyan, this is the man who called 911 and said he'd been allowed to escape, and 31-year-old Dana Williamson, and don't let the name fool you, it's a guy, in the home invasion robbery. Now, Davie detectives said that they'd suspected Panoyan from the beginning. Panoyan was actually a contractor, Kath, and he had met Bob 12 years prior at a Hollywood, Florida auto shop. Bob had worked there at the time, and Panoyan took his car in there for service, and Bob and Panoyan had struck up a friendship, and when Bob put his firm together, remember he became a general contractor, he brought Panoyan on board to be one of his employees. That's how long their friendship had lasted. And detectives were finally able to connect Panoyan to the guy named Dana after learning that 2 weeks before the murder, Dana was stopped by police on a traffic warrant. And Panoyan was in the car with him. Detectives said the pair plotted the robbery on the mistaken belief that Bob Decker kept a lot of money in his safe at home.
According to police, it was a series of tips to Crime Stoppers that helped them finally get the evidence they needed to solve the crime. 2 key pieces of evidence were found at the scene: a gun belt and a cowboy hat worn by the masked intruder. And in the bed of Panoyan's truck, they found a handcuff key that opened the set of cuffs that was used to shackle Bob Decker. So here's what police believed occurred. Charles Pinoyan dropped by the Decker house after supper for a visit that Friday night. Now, Donna was still at work and the men were sitting around watching TV. So as he's sitting there with Bob, he says, "Oh, shoot, I left venison in the back of my truck and I wanted to share some with you." So Bob's like, "No problem, cut through here." And he unlocked his back door. So Pinoyan went to the truck, got the venison, they put the venison away, but they never relocked the back door. So as they're hanging out watching TV, the back door burst open and a man wearing a mask and a cowboy hat walked in. And that's when everything happened. He tied up Bob and he tied up Grandpa Clyde and, left.
Scared the crap out of Carl.
Scared the crap out of Carl. And then, the three were marched into the bedroom and we know what happened from there. But Kath, before Pinoyan was actually arrested, now they already know he's the guy who made the second 911 call. And he told them that a masked intruder burst in and for some inexplicable reason let him go. So before he was arrested, detectives said that Pinoyan was acting as though he were cooperating with them, going so far as to reenact the crime for investigators.
I wonder what that looked like.
I know. Charades.
I know.
Yeah, but investigators quickly realized, wait a second, this version of events is not true. We definitely think he's lying to us. And he said he called 911 as soon as he left the house, but 30 minutes frickin' went by.
Right.
And Bob Decker told them he didn't expect Pinoyan to visit that night. It was just kind of random. And Pinoyan had originally told police that the gunman took his wallet and tied him up, but later allowed him to leave. So he had different versions of events. And Bob confirmed that Pinoyan had never been tied up.
And I read that at one point, Bob could see the two of them chatting with each other.
As he was laying down on the ground tied up?
Correct.
So 3 weeks after their arrest, Charles Pinoyan and Dana Williamson were indicted by a Broward County grand jury on 1 count of first-degree murder and 3 counts of attempted murder.
So, Kath, then something interesting happened. 2 years after the grand jury indictment, this is now 4 years after Donna Decker was murdered, the case took a new twist. A grand jury was reconvened to hear testimony, and it was known that it was new testimony from Charles Pinoyan, one of the accused killers. Now, of course, we all know grand jury proceedings are supposed to be secret, and Pinoyan's attorneys would only say that their client was not trying to get a plea bargain or reduce or eliminate his charges in return for testimony. Court records showed that on November 5th and 6th of 1991, closed-door hearings were held on the Decker case. After the second day of hearings, Pinoyan was released from jail on his own recognizance. He had been locked up these entire 2 years. And now, this action confused a lot of people, right? Defendants charged with first-degree murder are almost never released on their own recognizance.
Never, ever.
Ever, ever.
Except in New York. But never, really never.
Well, here's what happened. Kath, the man prosecuting the Decker case was Assistant State Attorney Brian Kavanaugh. He was raised in New York City as part of a large Irish Catholic family. I promise this comes into it.
They sound wonderful. I like them already.
Anyway, so he was raised in New York as part of this large Irish Catholic family, and the patriarch of this clan was a New York City homicide detective, Lieutenant Thomas Kavanaugh. Now, the reason that's important is because Lieutenant Kavanaugh, or Daddy Kavanaugh as we're about to start calling him, cracked a Manhattan murder case and cleared an innocent man of murder. Daddy Kavanaugh was actually the inspiration, Kath, for the main character of the 70s TV show, Kojak.
Oh, nice.
And I know he loves you some Kojak.
I'll take a Kojak rerun any day of the week.
According to an article in the Miami Herald by journalist Ronnie Green, after these indictments of Pinoyan and Williamson, Prosecutor Kavanaugh actually began wondering the same thing his father once had. Was he prosecuting an innocent man? Now, it turned out that Charles Pinoyan's attorneys, who were public defenders, had reached out to Prosecutor Kavanaugh and told them that their client was innocent, and it wasn't just because they were defending him. And we've talked about this before. We recently had a case where a public defender stayed with his client even after he wasn't being paid to be his attorney.
Right.
Because he believed so strongly in his innocence.
Right.
The public defender said that Pinoyan was so afraid of Dana Williamson and the legal system that he refused to talk to police or prosecutors and tell them what actually happened. So Prosecutor Kavanaugh called his dad and asked for help, which his dad agreed to do, and he started working on the Donna Decker murder case. So Daddy Kavanaugh interrogates Pinoyan time and time again, hitting him from every side, asking him questions, trying to trip him up, trying to see if he's lying about anything else, just on and on and on and on.
This is while he was in jail.
This is while he's in jail. And what's funny, Kathy, too, is Daddy Kavanaugh talked to a whole bunch of witnesses, but one of them that gave him a lot of information that helped solidify some of this for him, and I'm talking about Daddy Kavanaugh, was a jailhouse snitch, which I know we don't like, but in this case, he wasn't testifying in a trial.
Mm-hmm.
So he actually talked to the snitch a couple times because the snitch was like, oh no, Williamson told me that Pinoyan didn't know anything about it. Wrong place, wrong time. And the reason Pinoyan went along with it is that Williamson knew this guy and knew his family. And Williamson told the snitch that he had stuck a gun to Pinoyan's head and said, if you say anything, I know your family and I will kill every last one of them. And that's why Pinoyan kept his mouth shut. And Kathy, one of the reasons he was so scared of Dana Williamson was that, remember we talked about the 4-year-old boy he had killed?
Right.
Williamson was 15 years old when that happened. He had a 13-year-old friend who did it with him. They saw this little 4-year-old boy and a 6-year-old girl playing near some stables. And in Williamson's terms, on a lark, decided to kill this little boy. They searched 7 years in jail for it.
What a psychopath.
Exactly. Which explains a little bit about why Pinoyan's so afraid of him.
Oh,
and
for
knew
sure.
that he'd go through with it.
Or find somebody who would.
Exactly. After Daddy Kavanaugh goes through all of this, he actually concluded that Charles Pinoyan was not guilty of murder, just bad timing. Just sheer dumb luck put him at the scene of this crime, and he panicked afterwards.
So even though Bob didn't expect Pinoyan to show up at his house that night, he was there innocently.
Exactly.
Like, I'm actually here to give you venison.
Right. It wasn't some sort of devious plot.
Right.
So Prosecutor Kavanaugh and his dad, with Pinoyan's public defenders, were able to convince Pinoyan to tell his story to a grand jury. And here was the deal. If the grand jury believed Pinoyan, they'd cut him loose. But if they didn't, he would still stand trial with his co-defendant, Dana Williamson. And as we said, the grand jury believed him. That's why he was released on his own recognizance, inexplicably to everybody who heard that initially. And 2 weeks after that, Charles Pinoyan was formally cleared of the 1988 murder of Donna Decker and, of course, the attempted murders of Bob, Grandpa Clyde, and Little Carl. And all of you are probably wondering, what was that case that Daddy Kavanaugh worked on where he cleared somebody? Mm-hmm. Stay tuned for next week.
Ooh.
We're going to handle it.
Or the week after.
Nope.
Is it going to be next week?
It's going to be next week.
Okay, sounds good. Yay, Kathy's writing.
Oh, I thought you were doing it. I just feel like we can't drop that.
No,
and
that's
have
true.
Somebody be what case was it?
We got to go back to back.
And it's a good one. Are you going to imitate Telly Savalas?
No. According to an article in the South Florida Sun Sentinel by Lane Kelly, shortly after additional testimony from other sources, the Broward County grand jury indicted Dana Williamson's younger brother Rodney as a co-conspirator in the crime. Prosecutors said Rodney served as a lookout while Dana carried out the initial attack, but Rodney joined Dana in handcuffing and hogtying Bob, Grandpa Clyde, and, poor 2-year-old Carl. Anyway, when Donna returned home unexpectedly, Dana and Rodney stabbed her repeatedly and then shot the 3 family members. 5.5 years after Donna Decker was killed and her family was irreversibly changed, Dana Williamson went on trial. After 4 weeks of testimony and 235 pieces of evidence, the jury deliberated for 6 hours before finding him guilty on all charges. Dana was sentenced to death in addition to 13 terms of LWOP, with 4 of the life sentences running consecutively and an extortion sentence of 30 years. So if the death sentence was overturned, Dana Williamson would still face at least 130 years behind bars. It's like the judge was like, how do I throw the book at him? I'm going to throw the book at him this way. I'm going to throw the book at him that way. I'm going to slap him with the book in the face.
I'm going to knock him over the head with it and then swat his ass.
Right. Rodney Williamson went to trial 10 months later and was charged with first-degree murder, 3 counts of attempted murder, and 13 other felonies for the invasion of the Decker home. A jury found him guilty after just 4 hours of deliberation. And before sentencing, the judge said to Mr. Decker that he knew no punishment could take away the pain inflicted by Williamson and his brother. And he then sentenced Rodney to 3 consecutive life terms plus 30 years for his part in this travesty. After Rodney's sentencing, the surviving Decker family members had finally gotten justice for the terror and death that they faced that night. Outside of the court, after the verdict was read, Bob Decker choked back tears and said he was really happy that it was finally over. And he gave an interview, and at the end, he simply said, "I'm tired of it." Bob also talked about the lasting impacts of the trauma that he, his father, and his son suffered that night. He said that little Carl, as Kathy had said, had lost hearing permanently in his right ear and was under psychological care.
He was 9 years old at this time.
Yeah. No, I get it, man.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Grandpa Clyde suffered from repeated sinus infections where the bullets had entered his head, and Bob had permanently lost his sense of balance.
And Kath, just 1 year later, an appellate court overturned the 3 attempted murder convictions for Rodney Williamson. Assistant State Attorney Brian Kavanaugh, who prosecuted Rodney, said the decision would have little effect on Rodney's stay in prison. Because, Kath, what happened is the appellate court upheld the rest of the charges that Rodney was convicted for. So he still had 2 consecutive life sentences plus 30 years on his other convictions. Prosecutor Kavanaugh said he just needs to accept that he's not going anywhere. Thank you for listening. We hope you liked this. I really hope you like the one about his dad because it looks super interesting, but it's from 1963.
Yeah, Daddy Kavanaugh.
Yeah, and we're
coming up next.
And we're calling him that through the whole episode.
We're going to lose half our listenership.
I think we'll get people too.
All 10 of them.
Exactly. Aww.
I'm kidding.
All right. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned.